This is the longest poem ever written by a single poet, 3 times the length of the Iliad. It took 30 years to write, and it saved a language of pure poetry from dying. This is the Shahnameh, the book that quite literally is the story of Iran, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. For 5,000 years, different powers have tried to bleed this land dry. But while borders fell and people endured the unthinkable, the Iranian spirit refused to be erased. Why? Because of people like Ferdowsi. Let's go back to the 10th century. 300 years had passed since the Sasanian Empire collapsed. The temples had fallen dark. The language of power had shifted to Arabic. Islamic ceremonies were replacing the Zoroastrian celebrations, and the Iranian culture was on the brink of vanishing forever. It was a path already taken by Egypt, where an ancient civilization eventually adopted a new language and identity. Of course, Arabic itself is a very beautiful and rich language, but we're talking about one heritage fading into another, which is a loss for all humanity. So while the big cities changed rapidly, the Dehqans, the class of landed nobility, stayed rooted. They kept the old stories in their hearts and the forbidden manuscripts in their basements. It was then that they began funding Ferdowsi, a son of their own class, to give their memory a voice. So with exclusive access to Shahnameh, the Book of Lords, he began writing his epic verse. Ferdowsi took thousands of years of scattered myths, history, and oral folklore and wove them into a single, unbreakable timeline. A grand chronicle of every king and how they forged the destiny of this land. Of course, he wasn't the first to try. A poet named Marzavi wrote his own version of the Shahnameh that is now lost to time. Then Daqiqi began his own version, but after only 1,000 verses, his own servant killed him. So then Daqiqi appeared in Ferdowsi's dream, holding a glass of wine and saying, "You are the only one who can finish what I started." Or at least that's what Ferdowsi says. He kept those 1,000 verses in honor of the fallen poet and then dedicated 3 decades of his life writing the rest, creating a fortress for Persian. And this is not an exaggeration. Ferdowsi made a conscious choice to avoid any loan words. Out of 50,000 couplets, fewer than 900 words are Arabic. He wanted to prove that Persian is a complete tongue and needs no borrowing to be magnificent. Now, speaking of words, what does Shahnameh really mean? What most people don't know is that Ferdowsi never actually gave the book a name, but based on some verses in the book, scholars later decided to call it Shahnameh, which comes from Shah, king, and Nameh, which means letter or any formal record. But, on the other hand, some say that the book is not just about the kings. In fact, the most important character in the whole book is not a king. So they argue the correct title is actually The King of Books, the most valuable piece of Persian literature. Here on the Daughter of Iran channel, I'll stick with the Book of Kings as it still makes more sense to me. But it can also be an irony. Some people call the book the Graveyard of Kings because its tone isn't exactly celebratory. At first glance, of course, it seems the opposite, like a grand tribute to the glory of kings, because it needed attention and patronage. Even centuries later, Turk, Arab, or Mongol kings who ruled over Iran commissioned illustrations of the Shahnameh just to see their names attached to it. They loved the book, but that's because they wouldn't read it. Why do you think they needed the paintings? A careful reader knows that to Ferdowsi, these political games are ultimately absurd, an ego struggle for a throne that will turn to dust sooner than you think. That's why every single time a king dies, Ferdowsi gives his speech. Wow, so this one died too, huh? And he was a king. Looks like even the kings can't escape death. Every time. Now, let's go over some of the important plot points in the book. Shahnameh is usually considered to have 3 main sections: mythological, heroic, and historical. The mythical age is very short, and it starts with the first king, who is also, based on older resources, the first human, Q-Mars. He became the king of the world, and all creatures bowed to him. So he is bestowed with the Far-e-Izadi, the divine glory, which is a confirmation from God that only remains with a king as long as he is just. The four kings of this era are the architects of civilization. They discovered fire, domesticated animals, built houses, learned things like sewing and blacksmith. Everything is going great until Ahriman, the evil spirit, realizes that humans are gaining power. And thus begins the eternal battle of good versus evil, which continues throughout the whole book. Each king has a different strategy to face Ahriman. But as we go further, both sides become more complex and harder to fool. But the first king actually defeated by Ahriman is Jamshid, who takes Iran to the height of civilization. But greatness breeds arrogance. As Jamshid feels more and more proud, his far vanishes and he falls. The Iranians, desperate and hurt, invite a foreign ruler to take the throne. Zahak, an Ahriman puppet. The devil kisses Zahak on the shoulders, and from those spots, two black snakes sprout. Zahak must feed them every day with the brains of two young people, or the snakes will torment him forever. This is one of the timeless metaphors of the book that was repeated throughout history. The tale of tyrants usually begins with insecurity, continues with inner torture, and ends in the same state: utter disgrace. My favorite part of the story is when Zahak is finally overthrown after 1,000 years, but then God says don't kill him. Even though he is the worst king in the whole book, he's the closest thing to the devil, they don't kill him. So they just bound him within Mount Damavand, Iran's most iconic peak. I see it as this: attacking evil with its own tools just breeds a new devil within you. True victory is to refuse to engage on their terms. So with the tyrant gone, light returns to Iran and we move into the heroic age, the book's longest section. This era is dominated by one name: Rustam, Iran's greatest hero, akin to Hercules, but deeply human. Rustam is a pahlavan, a champion of the people. He serves the throne, but is often wiser and stronger than the monarch himself. He represents the patriot's tragic dilemma. Loving your country so much, you're always first in line to protect it. But that means sometimes you have to stand next to an unworthy ruler. Every part of Rustam's life is dramatic. Even in the womb, he was so large his mother couldn't deliver him naturally. So it took the mythical bird Simorgh to instruct humans on how to perform the first C-section in Iran, leaving mother and baby both healthy. It's interesting that in some parts of Iran, people still call this surgery Rustamzad. In other parts, they've already replaced it with cesarean. Rustam also performs the first recorded one-night stand in our history. He spends the night with a princess who was already in love with him from what she had heard, leaving behind a son that he never gets to raise. This leads to the ultimate tragedy of Persian literature, the tale of Rustam and Sohrab. Father and son meeting as enemies, unaware of each other's identity until it's too late. And that is the point. Our hero is monumental, but not perfect. Throughout the book, there are points in which Rustam makes mistakes. There are moments where Rustam's horse, Rakhsh, senses that something is wrong and tries to warn his master, but Rustam ignores him until he has to pay the price. You see, Shahnameh defies a single genre. It weaves together philosophical dilemmas, political games, love stories, and complex family bonds. In these pages, hundreds of characters come to life, from demons and dragons to celestial beings and ordinary people. Like Kaveh, the legendary blacksmith who rebelled against Zahak. Now, some argue that among all these characters, Ferdowsi doesn't really give women agency or power. So he might not have believed in gender equality. To that, I'd say, of course he didn't. We're 1,000 years ahead and look at our world. The stage of this show is, of course, male-dominated, and the main arcs revolve around them. But when we do get a female character, they're far from submissive. Remember the first story I told on this channel, Bishan and Manija? Manija literally kidnapped the love of her life to riot against her father. Now, was she a spoiled brat? Yes. But a doormat? I don't think so. A bolder example is Gorda Farid. When a man, Sohrab, attacks the fortress inside which men are paralyzed by fear, she puts on armor, hides her hair, and rides out alone. She can't match Sohrab's physical strength, so she uses her wit, outsmarting him into tactical retreat, losing the battle, winning the war. And Ferdowsi wanted to awaken this spirit in everyone. Ferdowsi's writing is fluid and sonorous. It feels like it was written not for solo reading, but to be proclaimed, awakening the grit in society. That's why for centuries, the Shahnameh has been recited in the zurkhanes, the traditional gyms, and performed in coffee houses or public forums. This energy sparked a whole new theater genre, Naghali. At a time when music and acting were suppressed, epic storytelling became the ultimate loophole for artists. The Naghal used his body and voice and sometimes giant scrolls behind them to bring Ferdowsi's majestic imagery to life. Just like what I did here. Hey dude, what's up? Okay, maybe not exactly the same. The other group of artists who loved this book were painters. Since figurative painting was forbidden, visuals had to be either abstract or rooted in literature to be justified. The Shahnameh was the perfect vessel. While many books have been illustrated in the Persian miniature style, the imagery in the Shahnameh is so visceral that experts believe Persian painting wouldn't be what it is today without it. I mean, look at this. I don't know if Shah Tahmasp was a good or a bad king, but the illustrations on the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp are the absolute zenith of Persian painting. Of course, that Shahnameh, like the other versions, has been dismantled and its pages scattered across the globe. And by globe, I mean Europe and America. But at least it's safe at a time like this. The book's third section is the historical age, where legend blends into reality. As we approach the 7th century Arab invasion, the tone shifts. Here, the book tells a little story about King Bahram, who goes hunting and then asks an old village woman for some milk. She tries to milk her cow, but the udders are dry. Then, not knowing she's speaking to the king, the woman says, "Even the earth's bounty dries up when the heart of the ruler turns unjust." Near the end of the book, a Persian general writes a letter to his brother before the last defeat. He predicts the loss of the Far and warns, "From now on, people will wear only black, and the truth will be hidden." As Ferdowsi wrote these words, his own life was unraveling. He watched his fortune vanish, his son die young, and depression take over. But he knew he could only die in peace once this project was finished. The book ends with the last king, Yazgerd III, running for his life. He asks a miller for a place to hide from the Arabs, but the miller murders him. And just like that, the glorious Sassanid Empire and a massive chapter of Persian history ends. In 1010 AD, our 71-year-old poet presented his life's work to Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi, who had apparently promised him a fortune. But the Sultan, uninterested in Persian heritage, offered a pittance. Legends say Ferdowsi took those coins to a bathhouse, split them between a drink seller and an attendant, and walked away. 10 years later, Ferdowsi died in poverty. A cleric didn't let him get buried in the Muslim cemetery, branding him as a heretic. Even though Ferdowsi always says that he's a proud Shia, I guess his crime was honoring Iran's Zoroastrian past. So he was buried in his own garden in Tus, in modern-day Mashhad. But I don't think he really expected more. He knew it would take generations for his efforts to bloom. As he predicted, "نمیرم از این پس که من زنده ام که تخم سخن را پراکنده ام." 1,000 years later, in 1934, Reza Shah built a grand mausoleum over his grave to host the thousands who visit Ferdowsi every year. Today, we're going through some of the darkest crossroads of Iran's history, and I think Shahnameh was written exactly for times like this. It's a reminder that you should protect your shelter, your fortress, so in due time, it will protect you. As our kings and their kings tweet from their thrones, we sit together at night and read these lines. بناهای آباد گردد خراب ز باران و از گردش آفتاب. Great buildings will fall to the ground as rain and the sun keep spinning around. پیافکندم از نظم کاخی بلند که از باد و باران نیابد گزند. I built a palace of verse so high no wind or rain could ever defy. نمیرم از این پس که من زنده ام که تخم سخن را پراکنده ام. From now on, I am always alive. The seeds of words I've sown will thrive.